Welcome to Season 4 of Inflammation Nation. My name is Gráinne O'Leary. Inflammation Nation is a podcast from Arthritis Ireland aimed at increasing awareness and understanding of arthritis and related conditions. A warm welcome to today's episode of Inflammation Nation. Today we're going to be talking about the Advanced Healthcare Directive and enduring power of attorney. And I'm delighted to be joined by Dr Ruth Usher, who's a lecturer in occupational therapy in University College Cork. Her primary research interest is in gerontology, and she's also undertaking a fellowship in evidence synthesis. Her PhD research explored the role of occupational therapy in assessing and supporting older adults' decision-making capacity, particularly in relation to independent living. Before joining academia, Ruth has over 10 years clinical experience working as an occupational therapist, primarily with older adults, across a range of settings in rehabilitation, reablement, long-term care and palliative care. In fact, she started out as a staff-grade occupational therapist in the Rheumatic and Musculoskeletal Disease Unit in Our Lady's Hospice and Care Services in Harold's Cross, a service many listeners may be familiar with or have heard of. So a very warm welcome to you, Ruth, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks very much for having me.
And I suppose the first question I'm going to ask you is, can you explain, what decision-making capacity is? Because I think it really informs some of the topics that we're going to talk about here today.
Absolutely. Capacity is our ability to make decisions and involves understanding the facts and circumstances on which a decision is based. And it's our ability to keep this information in mind and to weigh up those facts when making and communicating a decision. The new legislation that we have, the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Act, has a number of guiding principles, and one is that everyone is presumed to have capacity unless proven otherwise. But there's also a recognition that capacity can change or fluctuate over a time. And there's, I suppose, certain illnesses that may affect our capacity, such as dementia and Alzheimer's disease, or maybe a serious injury to the brain, whether this is from an accident or illness, like maybe a car accident or a stroke or something. And also maybe some people with intellectual disability or certain mental health conditions may find that they have challenges to their decision-making capacity as well. So I suppose if you're worried about losing capacity, or if you have a condition that may affect your capacity in the future, it can be worth having a think about planning ahead. And that's where today's topic of assisted or advanced healthcare directives and enduring power of attorney could be quite useful.
Thanks for that introduction. And I suppose let's have a talk now about, the Advanced Healthcare Directive, and I suppose why it's particularly important for individuals with chronic conditions like arthritis.
Well, any planning ahead I think is useful because these kind of, decisions. So the Advanced Healthcare Directive is concerned with decisions that relate to healthcare. The clue is in the name, I suppose. So it's really about healthcare and medical treatment decisions. And it lets you, it's a tool or a record that lets you document your wishes and your preferences in relation to healthcare and medical treatment decisions in case that sometime in the future you are unable to make those decisions, that you lose your capacity. So essentially it's letting you write down any treatment that you do not want, and then doctors or other healthcare professionals would consult your Advanced Healthcare Directive if you lose the ability to make a treatment decision. It also would allow you to request medical treatment options, but just to be aware that this isn't necessarily legally binding in the same way that refusing a treatment is. And it would also allow you to appoint someone you know and trust as a designated healthcare representative that would help you execute the decisions as per your Advanced Healthcare Directive, so ensuring that your wishes are followed. And why it's particularly important, I suppose, is because it gives healthcare professionals a guide, and so your wishes and preferences are known and they can be adhered to. And it's really important for everyone to consider that we're all living longer, as we know, and with this greater life expectancy, we see increasingly people are living with chronic conditions and with neurodegenerative conditions like dementia becoming more common. And having such conditions doesn't necessarily mean that you will lose capacity, but if there was any doubt, having done this kind of forward planning, it can make things a lot easier. When you think about your own wishes and preferences and discuss them with people and put any arrangements in place, it gives clarity, and therefore it's easier to ensure that your rights are upheld and respected. And I suppose I think it's useful to think about, say, our experiences of everyday decision making. We know that decision making is confusing, and it's also quite effortsome. Like, it takes a lot of effort, and like a very everyday example is, you turn on Netflix after your long day and you're tired, and you can be presented with thousands of options.
Recommendations or suggestions.
Yeah, we end up watching something we've already watched or something that someone has recommended or told us about, because otherwise we can be quite overwhelmed by the amount of choices we have. And similarly for much bigger decisions, unless we've thought about it in advance, we can also become overwhelmed by options and choices, and that can impact on our decision making. Also, we know that we're influenced by the time and the place that we have to decide, or the opportunity we have to get advice or consult resources, or what resources are available to us. So we frequently seek other people's input into our decision making. We look for support, even like buying a laptop, buying a car. Like I would always be looking for advice from family or friends or staff, or like I go to the experts, in technology, or, looking to know. So we don't usually make decisions completely on our own, and that doesn't mean that we don't have decision-making capacity. It's just useful, and these are very trivial examples that I'm given, whereas the decisions that we associate with Advanced Healthcare Directives or enduring power of attorney, they're much more significant and more complex because they relate to things like health and finance and welfare. But the same principle would apply in that it's much easier to manage those decisions if you've had to think about it beforehand and you know what you want, because that puts your options into focus. The legislation that we have now really places emphasis on will and preference. So again, having thought about these beforehand, decisions become easier to make, and that makes it easier for people to assist you, in fulfilling your wishes. Generally, I suppose there's a recommendation for all adults, even if you're currently in good health or, you're much younger. There is encouragement to start planning ahead. Not only does it safeguard you from, say, potential abuse in the future, but it also empowers you to have more control over your healthcare or your life decisions.
Yeah, that's the word I was just thinking of, is control. It really allows the person, the individual, to have control over those really difficult choices that might come down the line. So just, a follow on from that, how does an Advanced Healthcare Directive empower people, living with arthritis in managing those healthcare decisions?
As you say, so it is about offering kind of that clarity and control and maybe peace of mind, that your wishes are going to be respected, even if you're no longer able to voice them at this later time, in your life. So I think if you're living with arthritis or another musculoskeletal condition, there's a good chance that you have a sense of your own maybe disease trajectory, or how you previously experienced or responded to certain treatments. You might also have a sense of how you define quality of life. So therefore, you might actually have preferences regarding treatments or interventions that you would like or would not like, as the case may be. So I suppose it's kind of beginning to think about those in maybe a bit more of a focused way. The other thing is having a progressive condition like arthritis. There is also a chance that you've got a long-standing relationship with various healthcare providers, so maybe with your GP or specialists. And these can be very useful resources in terms of discussing your wishes and your preferences, helping you consider, possible complications or fluctuations in your abilities or, kind of your future. And that can help you clarify what your preferences might be, and allowing you then to designate someone like a trusted family member or a friend just who would act on your behalf and ensure your preferences are met. Because it allows you to set out specific instructions, you could talk about, say, how you want your pain relief to be managed, or if there's certain treatment you prefer, like you want to opt in for alternative therapy, before you go to narcotics, or maybe you're not interested in invasive treatment or surgeries because you're worried about how it might impact on your quality of life, whatever it might be. It's very individual. I suppose you maybe living with arthritis, you do have some experience or you have given these things some thought. And then the idea of maybe thinking about long-term care planning as well, because of the progressive nature of it. You might have an idea around that. And again, discussing this with healthcare professionals so that you could figure out and then ensure that you receive the most appropriate or preferential care for you as your condition might progress. It does help avoid confusion, and just to ensure that, say, everyone's on the same page in terms of your treatment goals, and making sure everything aligns with your own values and your preferences, particularly at a time of stress or uncertainty. And that can be really important.
Yeah, I mean, just to follow on from that then, are there legal requirements or formalities then? What are they for creating an Advanced Healthcare Directive in Ireland?
Yeah, there are. And once you're over 18 and you have capacity, you can make an Advanced Healthcare Directive. It is a much more straightforward arrangement in that It doesn't require a solicitor. So in effect, it's free and you can do it yourself as such. It has to be in writing and it has to be signed by you and 2 witnesses. And if you're appointing a designated healthcare representative, they have to sign it too. So there's the 3 parts to it. And there are, I suppose, existing templates that I would definitely encourage you would look at. So the Decision Support Service, the DSS, and also the Irish Hospice Foundation in their Planning Ahead campaign, they have created these really user-friendly templates that are worth downloading, printing and looking at. And they set out the 3 parts that I previously mentioned. So refusing medical treatment, requesting medical treatment, and then appointing a designated healthcare representative. Someone to carry out your choices or speak on your behalf. And that part is optional. Setting out the treatments that you wish to refuse and the circumstances in which that would apply, that's legally enforceable. And you need to clearly state what it is that you would not like to happen, whether that's mechanical ventilation or CPR, hemodialysis, chemotherapy. It can also extend to things like artificial feeding, through a tube in your stomach or your nose, or artificial hydration, that you're getting fluid through a drip. But it's not possible to refuse basic care. And then you can also include requests for specific treatment. So again, maybe it's you want particular pain relief or you have an idea of where you might like to be treated. But this part is not legally binding, as I mentioned. But the very idea of actually setting it out, it does, I suppose, ensure that your preferences would be considered during any decision-making process, because it is a very strong statement of your will and preference. So it's still really important that you have a think about, what you would like. And then if you are going to choose a designated healthcare representative to act on your behalf, you are, I suppose, also articulating that and giving them power to interpret your wishes and basically ensure that the Advanced Healthcare Directive is followed. So there's not a required legal format. There are certain things that need to be included, and that's why it's useful to use the pre-existing templates. And they just make sure that you'll have, like, say, your personal details, so your name, date of birth, contact details, then set out the healthcare treatments you do not want, the circumstances in which that applies, the treatments that you would like to receive, and again, the circumstances when that would apply. You have to state whether these would apply, if your life is at risk or not. And then if you're opting in to have a designated healthcare representative, that would, act as your agent. And then everyone needs to sign that, as well as a declaration that you're under no pressure to do so. And you don't necessarily have to tell anyone that you've completed an Advanced Healthcare Directive, but really it would be recommended that you would communicate with your doctor or other healthcare professionals. Like, I also think it's a really good idea to discuss this with your family and friends. It's very much a process, coming to think about what your wishes and preferences are. And then from a very practical point of view, you could give, say, your nearest and dearest a copy of it, email them a copy, send your GP a copy, or place a copy, in your medical file or your hospital chart or something. We often think, this stuff doesn't apply to us, or we don't really want to think about the situation when we wouldn't have capacity. But having these difficult conversations now is really important, when maybe things aren't, a crisis or aren't really, really stressful. But actually, there's a palliative care consultant in the UK, Dr Catherine Mannix, and she talks about reframing difficult conversations as tender conversations, because if something is labelled difficult, we automatically want to avoid it. We don't really want
absolutely.
to do, we don't want to do difficult things. Whereas if we reframe it as something, that's just really important, and these, I suppose, things are just important conversations to have, and they're the starting point for us figuring out what our wishes and preferences are, and then we can actually get things, documented. And it is a process that might require some time or reflection, so having the conversations first and then writing it down, recording it. And your GP, your consultant, other healthcare professionals that they can give you information about the treatment and care options that you have, or your potential future care needs, and then also help you express that in a way that is clear and unambiguous, because the clearer it is, the easier it is going to be for people to follow in the event that you no longer have capacity. But in order for you to get there, you need to, I suppose, have that clarity yourself, understanding what the options are and the potential implications of, requesting or refusing certain treatments.
Okay, that's really helpful. Do you think there's specific considerations that people with arthritis should keep in mind when they're drafting their Advanced Healthcare Directive?
Like I said, I do think it's important to take some time to think about what's important to you. It is a very personal thing. So think about what kind of treatments you would or you wouldn't want to receive if you were ill or injured. And it is helpful, like I said, to be very specific and be as detailed maybe as you can. And if you can record that in the form, in a way that's clear and unambiguous, it means that it will be easier for people to support that in the future. As I said, I think it is important to talk to, your healthcare team so you understand the benefits and the risks and the consequences of various treatments. As I mentioned, particularly for people with arthritis, because it can be associated with maybe significant pain, decisions relating to pain management might be pertinent, or use of medications or other interventions. You might want to give that specific instruction about pain relief or maybe about other, invasive treatments or surgeries. I do think the long-term care planning part is also something to consider, just how you might like things to look as your condition progresses. It is really personal. The form, the pre-existing templates may prompt you to think about, say, the use of life-sustaining treatments, which are any treatments that, replace or support a bodily function that's not working. So this could be when you need, maybe these life-sustaining treatments are going to be temporarily used, until you would regain or resume normal function again, or maybe they're the types of things that they're keeping you alive, and if they were removed, it would actually maybe hasten or cause death. So, that's the things like the ventilation, mechanical ventilation is like a breathing machine, or resuscitation, or your artificial feeding and hydration. So they might require, again, a bit of thinking about the circumstances where you might decide whether you think it's, appropriate or life-saving, or the circumstances of you being, maybe if you were very unwell or you had an illness that was very advanced. Having to think about where you think that would be beneficial or not, and then just understanding the ramifications of it.
So you mentioned earlier on about, appointing a designated, healthcare representative. How important is that for a person to appoint that representative, and what might they look for in that person?
It is, I suppose, an important point to consider. It is optional, so it's not necessary, but having the opportunity for someone that you know and trust to act on your behalf, to execute those decisions is potentially something that would be very beneficial for people. And I think the other thing to emphasise is that people often think that an available family member or a next of kin can step in if needed and make healthcare decisions on, your behalf or family member's behalf. But that's not actually the case. A next of kin can certainly be a point of contact, but they don't have any authority in making healthcare decisions for you unless they've been appointed as a designated healthcare representative. So that might be an important point for people to consider. And then in terms of deciding who you would appoint as your designated healthcare representative, well, they have to be over 18 and they have to agree to do it. They have to agree to act in accordance with your will and preference. And for some people that might be difficult if they disagree with your choices. So that's something to consider. But otherwise, I suppose it's someone that you know and that you trust and that you're happy to have these potentially challenging conversations with. It can't be someone who's paid to look after you, unless, say, that person is your spouse or partner or child. It can't be someone that owns, say, the nursing home or residential care facility that you live in, or it can't be someone that's convicted of any offence regarding you. So I think really just think about maybe a friend or a relative, or someone that you trust and respect and that you know would speak on your behalf. And then that you can actually discuss what kind of treatments you'd like, particularly if you're thinking about end of life stuff.
And just a follow on question from that, you mentioned that this representative is different to next of kin, and I think a lot of listeners will find that interesting. About I think there might be an assumption out there that if somebody's their next of kin, that they automatically step in to make those decisions if somebody doesn't have the capacity to make the decisions. Is that designated healthcare representative? How do they formally get recognised or acknowledged? Is it in the Advanced Healthcare Directive?
Yes, and you set that out, yeah, and they'll sign that form as well, along with you, and your declaration as well, saying that you're not under pressure, to do this as well. So they have to be willing, and that's where I think it is, even though you're not obliged to discuss things with them beforehand, I think to make it really meaningful, I think it is important that you have those conversations beforehand, so they're happy to take on that responsibility. Mm-hmm.
A further question, I suppose. So we're talking about making that directive, putting that in place, and you've very clearly outlined that there's templates which are really helpful to help through that process. But obviously people's wishes, their views, etc., or even the progression of an illness or a disease might change, that will change and may well change considerably over time. How can people make sure that their directive remains relevant and up to date, as that progression happens.
And that's a really important point, that it should be kept under review because, as you say, your wishes can change, as can your health and your circumstances. They can also change. So it's often recommended that you review it regularly. So maybe you're going to put a reminder in your diary or in your phone, to actually once a year review that, make sure you're still happy with it. Like April Fool's Day springs to mind, but you might say, like, after your birthday you're just always going to check in that you're still happy with the arrangement, or if you've appointed a designated healthcare representative, that they're also happy with the arrangement too. You can change or vary your Advanced Healthcare Directive at any point in writing, and you can also revoke or cancel it as well. But it is just worth keeping an eye on it, like, say, particularly if your condition was to progress, or also maybe you receive a new diagnosis, or maybe a new medical treatment also becomes available, and so then that changes how you feel. So you just need to make sure that it reflects your current medical situation and your current wishes.
So thank you for that. So I'm going to just kind of pause before we move on to our next topic, which is about the enduring power of attorney. So can you explain what enduring power of attorney is, the purpose of it, and how it differs from an Advanced Healthcare Directive?
When you've got your decision-making capacity intact, you can appoint this person to make decisions on your behalf for a time in the future when you're unable to do so. So while the Advanced Healthcare Directive addressed healthcare-related decisions, appointing an enduring power of attorney would address financial, property, or personal welfare decisions. So it's not used for healthcare matters. So the enduring power of attorney is basically an arrangement for how your affairs will be managed while you're living, but you need additional supports. So in summary, you're appointing someone who's called your attorney to make decisions as directed by you. They're called your attorney, but they don't need to be a lawyer, of course. They're effectively your agent, and you're giving them the power to make decisions about your finances, your property, personal welfare, as set out in your enduring power of attorney document. So generally the attorney is someone that's close to you. Again, someone that you trust. It could be a spouse, a partner, child, or sibling. And you can choose to give them general authority to act on your behalf about, many of your affairs, or alternatively, you can give them authority to do specific things on your behalf. And you can also have more than one attorney. So you can, have different attorneys doing different things, working separately or making decisions together. And you can choose to have a replacement attorney in the case that maybe one of your attorneys is unable to continue in their role.
And is there a preference, Ruth, from your experience around that, whether, because I've just heard different things about, particularly in family situations where there might be a number of adult children, whether one person gets appointed or whether it's, two or three people get appointed.
Yeah, and I think again, like, not to be evasive, but I think that is a very personal decision as to whether you would have, one attorney or more. Like, I guess there are maybe pros and cons to either. So in one way, having multiple attorneys, you could say that you're sharing out kind of responsibility or the burden, or there might be specific people that have particular skills or expertise that you want, for handling certain affairs, like financial management or healthcare. It could also be argued as well that there's maybe more protection in it against, say, risk of kind of misusing power, because again, everything would need to be discussed and agreed, by more than one person. But as you mentioned, like, family dynamics are complex and different opinions. So while it may be helpful for facilitating some discussions, it may also make things more complicated in terms of trying to consider various perspectives. So again, it would be really important to get legal advice from your solicitor on this, ensuring that everything is properly structured in your power of attorney document if you've got multiple attorneys involved.
So that leads me on to my next question is, can you explain around the process without, obviously we can't get into the, complete nitty gritty today, but, many people listening may or may not be aware that this has all changed in the last few years in Ireland. There's been quite significant changes. So can you walk us through like what that process is?
There are lots of resources that would help you to do this, but effectively your enduring power of attorney, again, like the Advanced Healthcare Directive, it has to be made in writing and it has to be signed by you and witnessed by two other people. It also has to be signed by the attorney or attorneys that you're appointing. And it has to give the details of the authority that you want to grant them, details of the decisions that you want them to make on your behalf. Unlike the Advanced Healthcare Directive, you're going to need the input of a solicitor or a lawyer, and you're also going to need the input of a doctor or other healthcare professional in terms of assessing your capacity. So straight away, I suppose there's more complexity and also potentially more cost associated with it. Again, before you would even begin, like we've kind of said, you would have a think about, who you want to be your attorney. Do you want to have a replacement attorney? What kind of decisions you want them to make? Any decisions you don't want them to help you with? Anyone else who kind of would need to know or be aware of the arrangement that you're setting up. And then with the way things are currently, you actually need to go onto the Decision Support Service website and set up an account there on My DSS. So it has to be a fully verified account. And I suppose there's been some commentary that this is a little bit complex, so maybe make yourself a strong cup of coffee if you're going to go and do this, and have a look at online. They do have lots of videos and guides and explainers that will help you figure out the process, but you need to be fully verified, and the person who will act as your attorney also needs to have their identity verified, and they need to have a My DSS account as well. So that'll be the first step, is even just getting that account set up to manage your application. Then once you've got that done, you would fill in your enduring power of attorney application form, and that's where you really set out the details as such. So you'd include again your own personal details, details of the person you're appointing as your attorney. If you have any existing decision support arrangements in place, you would also need to note them. But then you need to talk about the authority you're giving your attorney, the specific decisions you want them to make on your behalf. If you're appointing more than one person, how they'll work together or not, if they're going to be paid or not. And then once you fill in the sections of that form, you would save it, and then you download it, and then you take that with you to go and meet your solicitor. So your solicitor is going to interview you to make sure that you understand the implications of making an enduring power of attorney, because it is a significant transfer of power, and that's why the process is that bit more complex, I guess. After they've interviewed you, they'll complete a legal practitioner statement that'll say, that they've interviewed you about your understanding of, setting up this enduring power of attorney, and they'll sign that off. And you also then need to sign the declaration there in front of your witnesses, and your attorney also needs to sign and date it as well. And that's actually the execution of the enduring power of attorney. That you've got 3 months then to go and register your arrangement with the Decision Support Service. You and your attorney need to be together, the same place, same time with your solicitor to do that, and in front of 2 witnesses. So there could be a bit of, I suppose, logistical consideration in setting that up. Then when you've got that done, you take the enduring power of attorney, that form, then to your doctor or other healthcare professional. And you're looking for them then to assess your capacity and to sign a declaration or a statement of capacity saying that they've assessed your capacity and they're happy that you had capacity at the time that you signed your arrangement and your declarations. And then once you've got that done, you need to, I suppose, give notice. So you tell the notice parties that you've made this enduring power of attorney arrangement, and you give them a copy of it, including the signed declarations. So you need to give a copy to the attorneys that you've appointed, then your spouse or civil partner if you have one, any adult children you might have, or again, if you have any decision making support arrangements in place, if you've got a decision making assistant, co-decision maker, a designated healthcare representative, you would also give a copy to any of these people. You send them the notice form and the signed declarations and copy of the form. And then you upload everything, going back to this My DSS account. You have to upload all the required forms and signed declarations, say that you've notified your notice parties. So you upload all of that. You pay the registration application fee, which I think is €30. And then the DSS will look at your application, once you've submitted it, and they'll check that you've followed all the required steps and that your attorney is suitable, and they'll decide whether or not to approve or decline your application. And if they were to decline, they'd probably be going back to you for more information. And then if they approve it, they let you and your attorney know, or your attorneys know. The power of attorney still wouldn't come into effect until such a point that it's deemed you have lost capacity, and your attorney would notify the Decision Support Service, that you're no longer able to make a decision or more than one decision, as per your enduring power of attorney.
Yeah, you brought up a really good point there, because just in my experience, there's that lack of understanding about putting in place enduring a power of attorney and then enacting it. So can you just talk us through that? Because it's one thing, what you've described there is the process of setting up enduring power of attorney. However, that doesn't mean it's enacted. So under what circumstances and how can that then come into effect?
The circumstances are where you're deemed to no longer have capacity. So where you're having difficulty making decisions, people are concerned that you are not able to do this, any more independently. And if there are those kind of concerns that you no longer have capacity, the attorney then needs to notify the Decision Support Service. So it only takes effect there and then when you've lost capacity and when you've notified the Decision Support Service of this loss of capacity. You also have to have 2 statements from people who are doctors or healthcare professionals that support that belief as well. And then you're put on notice, that I suppose this power of attorney is being activated. And it gives a 5-week period where the person who is deemed to no longer have capacity or another notice party could lodge some kind of objection, to say that they're not satisfied. And while you're waiting for the Decision Support Service, I suppose, to look at that application, there are, I suppose, certain kind of limited powers that the enduring power of attorney can still have to make sure that there's no loss to your estate, to help kind of maintain things as they are. But then once the Decision Support Service would accept the application, they'll notify everybody again to say, that the attorney now has permission to use the powers. Again, where this might arise would be, again, if there was a significant change in usually it's in your health or circumstances, that would indicate that you are having difficulty making these decisions. And it probably is important to say that the legislation does highlight that, just because someone is choosing to make an unwise decision doesn't mean that they don't have decision-making capacity. And that's where that assessment of capacity is important. And that's an important change in this legislation. Previously, sometimes people were deemed not to have capacity purely because they had a certain condition or certain diagnosis. But just because you have, say dementia, doesn't mean that you don't have decision-making capacity. It may mean that you need a bit more support to make decisions, but it doesn't mean that you don't have capacity. So the onus is not on you to prove that you have capacity. The onus is on other people to assess your capacity and see what supports you need, to ensure that you can participate in decision-making in so far as possible. And that's been a big kind of a cultural shift for us, I think.
Yeah, it's really changed the whole way in which this is viewed, hasn't it? So there's certainly quite a few steps involved in it. So I suppose one of the messages here might be, if people are considering this, to understand that it will take time. So start the process as well.
Absolutely, and I think that's probably what our big kind of message really, isn't it, as well, that like making decisions around property affairs, those kind of things, they are difficult at the best of times, but then if you have to make them at a time of stress or crisis, they can become even far more complicated. So really this idea of thinking and planning ahead and then putting arrangements in place can make things a bit more straightforward. I don't know if straightforward is the right word, but it can make things go a bit smoother, should the time arise where there is, concern or doubt over your capacity to make decisions.
Can someone, who's, put this in place, can they revoke or change their enduring power of attorney?
Yeah. Once there's been no notification that you've lost capacity, if you still have your decision-making capacity, you can vary it, you can change it, or you can revoke it. Again, it has to be done in writing, and you have to let everyone know, you'd have to tell the attorney how things have been changed. You need to have a statement that would say that you understand the implications of changing or varying your existing arrangement. You need a statement from a solicitor to say that they also think that you understand the implications of your request and that they're happy that you're not acting under pressure from another person. And then you need to tell the attorney as well, to make sure they're aware of the variation that you're creating.
Yeah, I think one of the things as well that all of these changes in the recent past in relation to this topic has been, I suppose the introduction of sort of safeguards. Can you talk to us a little bit more about those safeguards that have been a change from what was there prior to that, that prevent sort of any type of abuse by a power of attorney or...
Yeah, and that's hopefully, I suppose, something that people will get a lot of peace of mind from, that this state body, the Decision Support Service that's been set up, so it's holding like a register of all enduring powers of attorney, and it supervises the attorneys. It's also created codes of practice for people and for specific professionals, to guide them on the best way of doing things. And they have a specific legal status as well, as they apply to people. And the attorney is required to keep records and provide a report to the Decision Support Service of any actions they've taken or any reasons why they've deferred any action. They have to send that to the Decision Support Service for any of the decisions that they've had authority to make. There's also a way that people can complain about an attorney on the grounds set out in the Act as well. So, I suppose there are those safeguards to protect against abuse. And even though the process that we've described, it has been perceived for some people as being quite cumbersome, it is so in a way that is to, again, protect you, that it is there to safeguard you from any potential abuse, so that people, I suppose, aren't acting on your behalf without kind of permission. It's really about trying to ensure your rights are protected, and that you can participate in decision-making processes, insofar as possible.
And I suppose the last questions on this topic would be, what advice would you give to somebody considering setting up an enduring power of attorney?
Start these conversations. As we said, they can be perceived as being difficult conversations, but maybe we just need to reframe them in our minds as important conversations. And so, have time to reflect on them, have time to kind of chat about them and think about them, and then make sure you record your wishes, thinking about how you would like, to be treated, how you'd like to be cared for. And it's important that your family, your friends or your carers would know about your situation and about your preferences. Use the guides that are available. So there's a lot of resources available through the Decision Support Service and then through other organisations like the Irish Hospice Foundation, the HSE, the Safeguarding Ireland. There's a lot of resources that would help guide these conversations and then help people record important information. That will just allow, I suppose, any potential confusion or conflict, to be, I suppose, sorted out a little bit in advance. So the Irish Hospice Foundation promote 3 steps. Think about what you want, talk to someone about your wishes, and then tell them, where your completed documents or forms are, your records are. So think, talk and tell are the 3 steps that they talk about. And then I suppose to review regularly, that would be the other important thing. Safeguarding Ireland did a survey they published last year in relation to awareness of Advanced Healthcare Directives, and they found very modest levels of awareness in Ireland, where I think 23% of people were aware of Advanced Healthcare Directives, which is, I think, low by international standards. And then furthermore, only 4% of people actually had an Advanced Healthcare Directive. Very low. And I think that one of the reasons given was, that people just hadn't really got around to doing it. They hadn't got a chance to kind of think about it. Some people weren't aware of the process, or they didn't think it was appropriate because they hadn't had a need to do it at this particular time.
There's a school of thought as well. I think culturally they say people in Ireland don't necessarily like talking or thinking about these things. I don't know how true that is, but
I know, and it is understandable. But hopefully we'll see a bit of a shift now that we have these legal arrangements in place. Hopefully we will see people embrace them a little bit more, because they are there to support and enable us. They're there to enhance our rights to make decisions. So I think the important thing is that we do start thinking about it and talking about it, and then follow through in terms of actually, making the arrangements and putting them in place.
Yeah, and hopefully this episode of Information Nation will increase awareness on these very topics. And I think that's probably a good place for us to finish up today. I might just ask you just to mention just one more time, because we mentioned quite a few, I suppose, areas where people are places where people can access resources. The Irish Hospice Foundation was one where there's templates for Advanced Healthcare Directive, but also information on the enduring power of attorney. Can you just name some of the other agencies that you mentioned as well? So obviously there's the Decision Support Service, which is dss.ie.
Yeah. And they also have a phone number and helpline. You know, if people found that they were going to open up an account and begin to apply for an enduring power of attorney, and they found the digital aspect of it, you know, somewhat overwhelming, there's a phone number to ring.
Which can be scary for people. Absolutely.
That's why I think that's kind of partly the off-putting thing, you know, that part of the process. So you may need to, again, think about, you know, like having chatted about this with people, you might need someone to help you, you know, work through these various steps and allow yourself the time, you know, like, as I said, this is a process, you know, to think about it and to make decisions and then actually to implement them. It is a process and it takes a bit of time and a bit of effort. HSE also have resources, and they have www.assisteddecisionmaking.ie. They have a dedicated website as well. The National Advocacy Service for People with Disabilities, www.advocacy.ie would also be worth checking out. Safeguardingireland.org. They have, as I said, they've recently run publicity campaigns on Advanced Healthcare Directives and I think enduring power of attorney as well, but they'll have useful information. The HSE has a national office on human rights and equality policy. Caoimhe Gleeson is heading that up. She's the general manager and she would have a wealth of knowledge, and she recently actually did a podcast with HSE, the HSE Talking Health and Wellbeing podcast, herself and Susie Byrne, who is a national advocate. They discuss the importance of planning ahead. So that also might be another podcast to listen to as well.
And I've actually heard the GSS helpline number for those people that might be, I've heard that's really helpful, just in terms of people helping people to navigate online and getting themselves registered. And I've really heard that they're really good as well.
And as I said, these are not specifically occupational therapy. Maybe they're not, these like are not specific to occupational therapy. But if there were, again, occupational therapy queries, the Association of Occupational Therapists of Ireland, AOTI, www.aoti.ie is also another kind of resource or website to look at as well. That's
really helpful resources. Thank you so much.
I think again, your family solicitor too, you know, is someone to have conversations with as well, and they will give you guidance on the processes. But as we mentioned, the Advanced Healthcare Directive, you know, is something you really can go about doing yourself as well. But a bit more support and process required with the enduring power of attorney for obvious reasons there. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been hugely informative, hugely awareness raising, and I think our listeners will really find it very, very helpful. So I'd like to thank you very much for your time today. Thank you. Thanks very much. I hope it's helpful. Thanks. That's all from this episode of Inflammation Nation. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or as they always say, wherever you get your podcasts. For further information about arthritis, you can visit our website, arthritisireland.ie, or contact our helpline on 0818 252 846. See you next time. Inflammation Nation is supported by Pfizer and AbbVie.